Hello, and welcome to our webinar, Consumer Sentiment on Travel and Sustainability in the Fall of 2021. Thank you to YouGov for sponsoring this webinar. I'm pleased to introduce Eva Stewart, who will be our webinar presenter today. Thank you, Eva. As we are recording, I have placed the session in listen-only mode so that the presenter will be audible. Once the presentation has concluded, Eva will answer your questions. Please type any questions that you may have into the chat feature. And I will now turn the webinar over to Eva. Thank you.
Thank you, Kathy, and hello to everyone who have joined us this afternoon. It's great to reconnect again. So indeed, we have the fall update to share with you, and I hope that you'll find this presentation interesting. Right, we've got some people, I think, still joining us, so we'll give it a couple of minutes and I'll briefly introduce myself. So I'm Eva Stewart, Global Sector Head of Travel and Tourism at YouGov. I've spent my entire career working in the research industry, as probably many of you did as well. I first spent about a decade at Euromonte International, then at Tourism Economics, which is an Oxford economics company. And now I work with travel and tourism organizations globally. We're building international brand trackers. We're helping organizations to understand their audiences, be it through off-the-shelf solutions or custom work. And I also invite you to connect on LinkedIn, as I'd love to get your feedback on this webinar, as well as any questions that you might still have. It's always really wonderful to broaden the professional network and exchange ideas. Okay. Before I dive into data, I thought it would be worthwhile for us to just spend a few minutes to actually introduce YouGov to those of you who may not be as familiar with the company and what we do. But also, this will provide a little bit more of a context about our panel research approach to contextualize data that I will be sharing later in this deck. So to start off with, YouGov is an international data and analytics group, which was founded in 2000 and thus considered the pioneer of online market research. It was early days for the internet, and at the time, many people were very skeptical about surveying people online. But, we've done it for over 2 decades and done it well. So now we became a global company working with local and international clients in many countries around the world. In fact, 20 years after our inception, someone in China decided it was a good idea to eat a bat. And now we're coming out of a global pandemic. And so most of our lives have shifted online. In fact, Kathy and I were saying we've had so many webinars as well. And this is how we interact and exchange ideas and research nowadays. So of course, all of that experience and expertise that we've accumulated, as well as, allowed us to develop some proprietary products and methodologies and tools that we now deploy in order to deliver some of the best research. And you don't have to take just my word for it. In fact, Pew Research, which is a nonprofit research tank, conducted an independent assessment of 9 online panel providers. They found that YouGov has consistently outperformed others on accuracy. Plus, our panelists always have a great experience taking our surveys, and therefore we have over 75% engagement rate or re-engagement rate. 1 year ago, today, we had 11 million panelists, and now we have over 17 million. So in such a difficult year, and I've heard that some of our competitors, in fact, have seen some attrition of their panels, but we're very proud that we grew that panel by 6 million people in a year, and we're of course still laser focused on retaining that same engagement rate. And again, one of the achievements that I personally am very proud of is that YouGov was selected to be the only survey company working and partnering with the World Travel and Tourism Council. So we don't just collect the data, but we also connect the data. And that really is what differentiates YouGov. I'm going to explain that exactly how that works. So it is our goal to understand everything about consumers, the travel sector, the travel and destination brands. And then we link the data that tracks your brand, whether it's done daily or through custom waves. And we can link it very easily and swiftly with the audience insight, which is also unmatched in the market in terms of the depth and granularity that we can go to. We can also connect ad hoc surveys, if you're running Omnibus or Field and Tab. And of course, we are in market every single day tracking all of the travel trends, which I'll be sharing very shortly with you. And we do that through proprietary tools such as Destination Index, which tracks destination brands around the world. And we do that through Global Travel Profiles, which is another tool we've developed recently, which actually looks at all of the path to purchase and travel sentiment and generally consumer travel preferences and consumer plans relating to travel. So we have a lot of industry knowledge that we connect to the research, and we also continue to innovate. And recently, not that recently anymore, but not that long ago, we launched YouGov Direct, which also can provide survey data in as little as 30 minutes. So very exciting tools and very exciting data. Now, I've mentioned the quality of our research, and here are a couple of examples I've included to illustrate what the leading publications are saying about our research. Because of this data robustness, YouGov has become the world's most quoted source, and this certainly helps us to continue to grow the panel at the rate that we had to date. So now let's begin by looking at the travel sentiment globally and in North America. And this particular data is sourced from YouGov's daily travel survey, Global Travel Profiles, which I've mentioned. It is live in 25 countries, including the US and Canada, as well as Mexico and Brazil in the region, but many other countries around the world. And the numbers in the following slides are based on almost 270,000 completed surveys since October 2020. And that equals to just over 29,000 in the US. So the data is rich, it's representative of general population. And so when you see the percentages relating to that, you can benchmark against those numbers. So assessing the data in the last 3 months, which is June through to the end of August, we saw that demand for domestic travel remained resilient, but only 1 in 5 consumers globally planned an international trip in the next 12 months. So that would include fall, winter, and spring seasons. There is still a large proportion of people who are on the fence or unsure about their travel plans, and around a quarter who would have decided not to travel in the next 12 months. And the key obstacles remain health risks, travel restrictions, and we've been noticing that there is more and more price sensitivity. In fact, typically we would see this in developing economies, all across Asia Pacific, for example. But since the pandemic, and of course, the associated costs of testing and additional insurance, or often inflated prices in local domestic markets because of the domestic demand. And this continues to raise pricing concerns in Western countries too. Now, Mexico and the US have strong domestic tourism markets, and that sentiment remained very strong throughout the year, as well as especially throughout summer. And Canadians expressed the highest desire to travel abroad. 26% planned an international travel in the next 12 months. And, if we compare that to only 16% of Americans or Mexicans. Now, the spring and early summer had seen the rising vaccination rates, which was great. We saw declining COVID case rates around the US. But people, and people began to travel to see their friends and family, and of course, enjoy the long awaited vacation. But more international destinations also began attracting the American tourists and welcoming them back to their destinations. But that did not necessarily translate into increased sentiment or demand. Now, the travel sentiment trend line, which measures the appetite for domestic travel in the US, continued to increase month on month, as we can see in this chart, since January this year, and it reached a peak in the summer months. But then we see it starting to tail off ahead of the fall, and also coinciding with the announcement of the Delta variant in the US, and of course the increasing numbers of infections related to the Delta variant. Now, if we're looking at the other three trend lines, we can see that international leisure, domestic and international business travel still remain fairly subdued, although compared to other countries, domestic business sentiment in the US was considerably stronger than in the neighboring Canada and Mexico. So, of course, the successful rollout of vaccinations helped significantly to reduce those concerns around health risks when traveling. And we can see this steep and consistent decline month on month. It's been fantastic to see, how that develops on a regular basis. But there was a recent 10% spike in concerns since the announcement of the Delta variant. So restrictions been easing, but again, people still feel that there is complexity of travel. And in the US, we also notice a consistent rise in price sensitivity, reaching a peak of 32%. So that means 1 in 3 Americans see the cost of travel as the main barrier to travel, at least certainly was the case at the peak of the summer. So to find out more, we ran an omnibus survey in June and found that lodging and transportation costs was the primary concern, with people noticing increased costs ahead of the busy summer season. Travelers were also worried about the other travelers not following COVID guidelines. People avoided crowded places and found that some of the local COVID rules in different states were unclear. As such, many, which is 86%, felt that driving to their preferred destination, or perhaps staying a little bit closer to home, was going to at least address or alleviate some of those concerns. So we see that car was a preferential rate, which typically is the case, but even more so since the start of the pandemic. Now, one of the ways how travel companies could now aid consumer confidence to travel is perhaps to help those who are undecided. And we can do that by clarifying the travel guidelines. In June, we ran another omnibus survey and found that most Americans felt that travel rules were not clear, or they haven't heard about them at all. Not only a third thought that travel guidelines were somewhat or very clear. So I wanted to share an example from across the pond of how a British company, an online travel agency, has overhauled their marketing strategy during the pandemic, and they improved their brand awareness by 43% in a relatively short period of time. So instead of sending emails about the latest offers and deals, they opted to share information and clarified all changes to the ever evolving travel rules and requirements, which were constantly changing at short notice in the UK. It was very difficult to track, even if you were working in the travel industry, let alone people who don't necessarily, breathe this information on a daily basis. We worked with with the OTA to measure their brand performance in the market, and they were certainly extremely pleased that this new strategy was helping reap the results immediately. And they are, of course, also hopeful that this is going to help them build a very loyal customer base for years to come. Now, coming back to the US, we look at national numbers, but we can also see the travel demand and considerations all the way down to the zip code level. For this webinar, I chose to look at domestic travel demand by state. And as you can see in the chart, we've got sentiment in August, which was still strong across the nation, with around 12% of Americans still planning to take a trip in September. 10% were planning to take it in October, and then 17% will still undecided when in the remainder of 2021 they might be taking that trip. Now, numbers for international leisure trips are indeed lower, as we can see the percentages across the nation, with highest in states on East and West Coast. And I expect that with the new US, UK, European corridor now open, which is fantastic news, there is an expectation that there might be a slight peak or spike in interest to travel abroad, because that supply of more attractive deals from airlines and hotels may increase, and just the exchange of tourism, those bilateral flows might inspire some more people to travel again and go visit places. As well as, of course, it's great for various different domestic states to attract those European and British customers. Oh, sorry. Now, let's take a look at how consumer attitudes about the COVID affect their lifestyles and travel preferences. Americans now see COVID situation through a more positive lens. The outbreak has dramatically changed the American lives and relationships over the past 18 months. The nation has a strong resolve and belief that situation is getting better, despite daily infections and hospitalizations hovering around the highest levels since January. There are less people who think the situation is getting worse, and consistently there are about 4 to 5% of those who are still in denial, I guess, about the existence of the pandemic at all. They think, it's totally over, and they thought that for a fairly long time. However, having said that, many Americans are still apprehensive about resuming life in the same way as it was pre-pandemic, even though some habits have changed and we've adapted, but many are still, many are fairly comfortable to go to a zoo or a theme park, as well as train stations, than if we compare that data back to December 2020. But comfort levels overall, as you can see in every chart, have not improved significantly, which was actually the expectation that we had. Earlier, we saw that 86% of Americans chose to drive somewhere this summer, and that correlates with low levels of comfort to return to airports, which in fact worsened for many consumers in August compared to December 2020. So this suggests that there's more work to be done around communicating about COVID health and safety protocols in place at the airports. And of course, we need to help consumers to feel more at ease when traveling by air, and that needs to be communicated. Now, overall, how did Americans perceive summer? Well, progress from summer 2020 doesn't mean that people consider summer 2021 to be good, well, that it was good. Only 1 in 5 people, which is around 23%, described the summer as good or as the best summer ever, from about 15% who said so last summer. The Northeast had the highest share of people who have liked the summer, with still paltry 28% calling it good or the best. And it's early summer avoidance of devastating natural events such as wildfires, or until after the survey was fielded, the storms, of the younger adults were more likely to think fondly of 2021. About 34% of adults under the age of 30 called it good or best ever. So what is the bigger worry for consumers? And does COVID remain the biggest concern compared to sustainability or climate change? And we can look at that as well. Now, when we consider sustainability in travel, we have to look at global data and try and benchmark this, because data in isolation doesn't necessarily paint the full picture. So we gathered data from 17 markets around the world. 2/3 of global consumers say that they are worried about climate change. That equals to about 66%. And whilst consumers in Mexico top the list of those most concerned, those in Italy and Spain are not too far behind. This is really important also to Americans. And we dug deeper into the American and the British market to understand and compare if consumers in both countries try to buy products from responsible companies that are socially and environmentally conscious. And our data revealed that Americans, in fact, are more supportive of responsible companies than the Brits. And the data also highlights that while Gen Zers, so those who were born 2000 and later, in Great Britain are more likely to opt for responsible companies, but it's millennials who take the lead in purchasing from environmentally friendly and socially conscious companies. Then we look at many businesses in the travel industry are, of course, thinking about it or even paving the way towards full recovery, planning marketing campaigns. And of course, it's not been easy since the pandemic has thrown away the established marketing playbooks. Not only consumers worry about coronavirus, but conversations around climate change are really taking center stage in the US as well as globally. So how to know what's more important? What do we communicate to consumers? So YouGov juxtapositioned these two issues and asked Americans what they were more worried about. And travel organizations should take note that indeed both issues are of great importance, but the generational divide is very stark. So younger generations are more worried about climate change than they are about COVID. and senior generations worry more about coronavirus more. And this matters, of course, to travel organizations, as depending on your audience and your clients and visitors, your marketing strategy should incorporate one of these issues or ideally both so that it resonates with a wider consumer pool. Now, if you're going down the sustainability route, it's important to go down a level and understand what's driving the demand. In the US, sustainable travel considerations for next vacation prioritize seeking authentic experiences that are representative of the local culture and spending money with local businesses or on local produce. It's worth noting that 1 in 5 Americans would also like to stay in eco-friendly or green accommodation. So something to think about, is it easier for them to find this on your website, in your destination? And certainly something worth looking into. And the reason for that, of course, is that brands with the right message are likely to be ahead of the curve and win big. Not that long ago, organic food, kombucha, reishi mushrooms, oat milk was popular mainly in California and most among niche audience. And now this is just a regular part of daily diet for millions of people around the world. Now, good trends catch on quickly. And those organizations which pioneer and champion good causes, they reap long-term rewards. So we can see how attitudes towards sustainable travel and sustainable brands have been shifting in the US. And people are prepared to spend, and they're prepared to spend more for sustainability. Now, in the final section of this webinar, I'd like to take a quick peek at the responsible travelers and what value do they bring to the US travel industry. So the way that we define responsible travelers, someone who's environmentally, who's wellness focused, also focus on environmental impact and is culturally minded. And responsible travelers indeed are a desirable demographic. So compared to a general US population, they're more likely to be millennials and tend to have higher disposable incomes, as we can see, over $1,000 to almost $1,300 a month. And marketeers also would love to know that responsible travelers have a clear passion for travel and they're excited to generally spend more when traveling. Almost 60% of responsible travelers like to splash out when they travel. They do that on transportation, accommodation, retail, and entertainment. Some of our data points that they like to shop at airports just to kill time. So this is a really nice segment for a variety of different travel businesses. However, although they don't mind spending the money, they like a good bargain. I can personally relate to that. I do like a good last minute deal, and just like 42% of responsible travelers, I don't mind waiting to book closer to the time of travel. So many responsible travelers also prefer to book the short breaks outside of school vacations or breaks. And so when you're thinking about launching marketing campaigns, if you're thinking about the segment, it's a good time to market to them, a good deal, particularly ahead of those times. Now, responsible travelers also appear to have taken more trips compared to general population. Almost 20% had taken 2 trips. 6% of them took 3 trips, and another 6% of them took 4 trips in the last month throughout the pandemic. Now, majority had also experienced a cruise vacation in the past. So again, This is an interesting audience for cruise companies and destinations with ports alike. Overall, it's clear that there are rewards on offer to brands which manage to establish a reputation for being, socially and environmentally responsible. And as climate change, worries sort of increase, so could the size of the markets, the market of intentionally of those responsible travelers, and something worth keeping in mind. Now, I've mentioned that responsible travelers are important for the leisure segment, but it also is for business travel. So looking at amount traveled in the last 12 months, these travelers have exceeded bus and car trips compared to general population. They've taken more flights for work. They stayed more in hotels than general population. And interestingly, they almost 3 times more of responsible travelers took 2 trips abroad for business during the pandemic. Now, we've established that that audience is important for leisure and business, but they also play a big role in their local communities. They're willing to contribute and volunteer, and certainly more so than other types of travelers. I've spoken to some of our clients in the US, and they said it's so important to align sometimes, strategy to attract travelers from other places, but also we want to be able to attract travelers from our own state. And we're thinking of various different angles on how to do that. And indeed, appealing to responsible travelers' interest to contribute and give something back is a really nice way of doing that. So the key takeaways to date, around 55% of the US population has been vaccinated, but vaccine hesitancy and high hospitalization rates still play to people's concerns around the health risks. And so subsequently, what we're seeing is that there's a continued worry about health risks when traveling. And so that puts a downward pressure on travel. This also keeps people away from more crowded places, from attending events, from going to conferences, going to perhaps sports events, etc. And so communication from travel brands and from DMOs around safe travel practices can really help bring more travelers back. We know that they're looking for bargain deals more than ever, so that should be something that is worth looking at. Also, sustainability and concerns around climate change are playing just as important role as COVID. So important to consider your customer expectations on new initiatives on sustainability and how that could help attract new visitors. And responsible travelers, as we've established, are very important for leisure, business segment, local communities. They prepare to travel, they prepare to spend more when traveling. But if this isn't necessarily the audience that you're going after, and you've got some other segments that you'd want to talk to us about, we're more than happy to help you out on that. And we can certainly look into any brand related data, consumer related data, travel sentiment. So any questions that remain post this webinar, either link up with me on LinkedIn, or I'd also like to take an opportunity to introduce my very good colleague, Kenton, who's in Chicago. He's one of our best client advisors, and he's very passionate about travel. He loves working with travel brands and helping them better understand the market. He's been very successful at doing that. So I definitely encourage you to reach out, let's chat, and hopefully we can help you. So I thank you very much for listening. Thank you for your participation. And I can see that we have, I think, some questions here as well. So what do you think are the biggest challenges in serving travelers during this time of constantly changing expectations? Um, I think the data recency is really important. So what we've done is we actually launched daily trackers in the market because of this constantly changing expectations, sentiment, interest, concerns. We've seen how people react to any notifications that are coming out, any new regulation, restrictions, any new announcements from politicians, and the sentiment bouncing around, up and down. So we therefore believe that it's very, very important to track it on a daily basis. We survey over 1,000 uh, uh, panelists on a monthly basis in every one of the 25 markets. For some of the larger markets like the US, we'll have maybe 1,500 or more monthly survey participants who complete the surveys. And we see that that data correlates really well with the bookings data. And we see that the sentiment and the preferences indeed are changing, they're shifting. So it's really important to understand how your brand is perceived by, perhaps even the changing customer type. And that customer is changing because we all have to adapt to new ways of living, new ways of traveling. We all have different levels of kind of risk aversion. And at the moment, for many people, travel is seen as risk. So we definitely want to be capturing that sentiment and all the changes on a regular basis. So being in the market, serving large panels, serving them on a daily basis certainly helps. Another question, not sure what the question is. Strange that Swedish are less concerned about climate change compared to Indians or Americans. Yes, actually, you're right. It's a very, very strange thing. In fact, it's not just the Swedes, but in Scandinavia, generally, when it comes to travel, people are less concerned about sustainability in travel than they are about other things, in sort of when it comes to travel. And generally speaking, of course, these countries have been championing the green agenda, environmental practices for a very long time. So it's so established in the market that it sometimes feels that many people are now taking it for granted, but most recent political changes in Norway and Sweden, where some of the old established parties have lost the election, now consumers are saying, okay, we have to do more for the environment. We have to change our ways. We're more interested now in doing something about it, and we will soon, I think, be seeing that shift and those considerations, um, you know, uh, going up in terms of sentiment increasing towards sustainability. How do US clients use their data the most? Well, in the US, just like any other country, really, when we work with clients, we help them out in different ways. So most of the time, of course, the pandemic meant that many organizations had to suspend their brand tracking. And now they have resumed that on a large scale. Since around May, we've been launching new trackers literally on a weekly basis. And we've been doing that through our custom team. So these trackers are very customized to people. Others are looking for data recency, efficiencies, cost effectiveness, and we have off-the-shelf brand trackers, which track the same data, the same variables across a variety of different markets. So that's really, really helpful for many organizations who want to understand what consumers are thinking about them. Would they recommend? Are they happy? Are they a happy visitor? Have they been there before? Do they want to come back? And if they're a travel brand client, um, how do they perceive one brand versus others? Are they keen to move brands? What's the purchase funnel looking like, etc. But then when you want to launch campaigns, you want to know everything about your audience. You really want to resonate because marketing spend needs to reap, needs to have a high ROI. So what we do is we help our clients to really understand the very, very granular, we go to granular detail about the audiences that you need to reach. We can look at their media consumption patterns. We can look at their psychographics, purchase behavior, lifestyles, attitudes, attitudes to brands, etc. And we can link it all up so that if you want to launch a campaign, we can test your creative, we can help you address the audience, we can then measure the campaign effectiveness at a really, really in a really cost-effective way. So if you want to know a little bit more about that, talk to us about it. If you want to know a little bit more about the travel trends, the travel sentiment and purchase behaviors and what consumers are worried about or what do they want from travel and how do they choose to travel, then there's another tool. And, again, we work with all kinds of budgets. So we can certainly help. Right. What do you think that DMO researchers should be asking their vendors and how can YouGov help? Well, first of all, DMOs should definitely ask about the data quality. So we've worked on a number of deals recently where our clients told us that it's just, we just can't use this data because it doesn't make sense anymore. We just can't trust the numbers that are coming back, and something happens and we can't even react to it in a timely fashion because of the latency of data as well. So you need to ask about data robustness, about quality, about how long you have to wait for the data to come back if you're doing a custom project, or if you're subscribing to the tool, then hopefully you should see that instantly. For example, brand tracking data from YouGov is only a day old, so it updates every single day, and the data about consumer profiles and audiences, that updates every week. And for travel tracking, again, we're in the market every single day. So I think you should consider that, as well as whether that data is in any way connected and can paint a proper picture. If you can compare millennials and Gen Zs, what would be the key differences in traveling habits, booking activities, media? Quite a broad question. What I've noticed in many developed markets, including, of course, US and some of the European markets, including the UK, millennials have actually sustained the travel sentiment, the appetite to travel the most, more than Gen Zs. In fact, millennials also typically have more disposable income. They're more willing to travel and experience things, and they really prioritize travel. Of course, Gen Z, it really depends on when they were born, but some of them are still, quite young and still university days or pre-university. So again, they may not be I mean, they will be a very, very important target. And of course, they use media completely different, the social media, all of their time is spent on, Instagram and TikTok. They don't even use Facebook, for example. And there are many other significant differences between those groups in terms of, bookings and activities. Again, there are different preferences of these two groups, but more than happy to, have a call, or we can look into this data on an online demo, and we can show you some of those differences for sure. Okay. So I think that concludes all of the questions. I thank you very much for participating in a discussion, for sharing those. If you still have anything or would like to connect with us, please do so. Would love to hear from you. And I wish you all the best and hope to see you at the TTRA conference in February. So all the best. Bye now.